everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing a currently reading update to chat about what I've been reading recently. This is my first currently reading video of the year, so we can talk about my first reads of January. So far in January, my reading has been going very well. I have read like 4 books so far, all between 4 and 5 stars. Feeling real good about my reading. Some of it has been rereading, but like I'm just happy to be enjoying the books that I'm reading, even if it's rereading books. But yeah, so the year has been starting out pretty well. I really want to like keep this energy, keep this like enjoyment throughout the year, because my last 2 years of reading have been very like mediocre, and like that's not fun for me. I feel like it doesn't make for really fun videos and stuff for you guys if I'm very like meh about a lot of the stuff that I'm reading. So this year I'm like so determined to have a good reading year no matter what. This is a bit of a tangent, but something I've been thinking about recently with my reading is realizing that I kind of have, there's like a pattern or like a cycle to my reading years, at least for the last like 2 or 3 years, which is that usually at the beginning of the year is usually like the best part of my reading year, because usually at the beginning of the year I'm very chill about my reading. I'm not putting pressure on myself. I'm very like, oh, it's the beginning. I have the whole year to read whatever I want. We're just like completely mood reading. And the first like 3-ish months of the year are usually like my best reading months. I usually read some of my favorite books of the year at the beginning of the year because I'm just like reading whatever I want, and like those are usually like the highlight of my years, like the first 2 to 3 months. Then somewhere around the middle of the year, I seem to always get some kind of like goal in mind, even though I've talked about that like I don't really like goals with my reading, and yet somehow around the middle of the year I always get some goal in mind that then I'm like, oh, I have to do this and I have to read these books in order to like achieve this goal. Like for the last 2 years, that goal has been about like clearing out books from my TBR shelf, which was like good. I'm glad in some ways that I did that, because it meant that I like kind of revitalized my TBR shelf, but also meant that I ended up reading a lot of books that I just like didn't feel like reading at the time, because I just was like, no, I have to read this now so that I can accomplish this goal. And so it just made for like a more like kind of middle of the year. And then by the end of the year, I always end up putting pressure on myself for one reason or another at the end. And then by the time we get back to the middle, to the beginning of the next year, I'm like, no more pressure on myself. Only being like chill about it and mood reading, and the cycle just happens again. This has happened for the last at least 2, probably 3 years. So that is something that I would like to try and change. It might happen again, because sometimes it is hard to change cycles like that. But this year, since I'm more like aware of this, I really want to kind of go into the year or not go into, but continue through the year, kind of taking that energy from the first 2 to 3 months and just be like, this is gonna be the entire year. We're just like only mood reading, 0 goals, only reading what I want to read, and you know, focusing on the books that I am most excited for and I really think I'm going to love. Like whatever I'm enjoying, that's what's happening. Anyways, that's what I've been thinking about recently, especially because my beginning of the year already going really well. But yeah, so that was a tangent. Let's just like get into what I have been reading, because that's what we're here to talk about. So the last book that I completed was Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna Maguire. This is her most recent release in the Wayward Children series, which is the series of novellas about kids who go through magical doors into a magical world that is like, each one is perfectly suited to that child and like what they need so that they feel most at home or most themselves when they're in that world. But then most often they eventually kind of get kicked back out of that world and then they end up at Eleanor West's home for wayward children. And so in this series, like every other book, we are following this main timeline where we're following characters at the home for wayward children, and then every other book takes place in one of those fantasy door worlds. So this is one of the ones that's in the Home for Wayward Children timeline. We are kind of coming back to some of the characters that we've known before, but I did really enjoy this. You know, I kind of enjoy all of the books in this series. I think I'm liking them more as they go on because each book kind of expands on the characters and the world, especially these ones that are all kind of continuing this timeline of that's taking place in the world of the Home for Wayward Children, because these books are so short. So as fun as they are, some of the first few ones, like, I enjoyed them, but I just wanted a little bit more from them. But as the story goes on, each book kind of builds on it, so I think I'm enjoying the series more as it goes on. But I gave this one 4 stars. Then the book that I am currently reading, I'm very excited about. I just started it last night because I just finished Where the Drowned Girls Go yesterday and then started a new book last night, so I'm not too far into it. But I am rereading The Blade of Fortriu. I never know how to pronounce this, but I looked it up and I think it is Fortriu, but it probably said slightly differently. Anyway, but this is the second book in the Breedy Chronicles by Juliet Marillier, and this is a reread for me. I reread the first book in the trilogy as my first book of 2022, and I loved it. It was amazing, and so now I'm very excited to continue on with the series. I am kind of hoping that I'll be able to reread the entire trilogy this month, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get to it because I do kind of like to read books in between. When I really like love books, I can't like binge books that I love back to back. I need like a palate cleanser of a book that like I enjoy but am not like as emotionally invested in. So I'm not sure if I will have time to read the full trilogy with my like palate cleansers in between, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Anyway, so this is the second book. This trilogy is, the first one is following Breedy, who is was a Pictish king, and it's following him from when he's like a very small child. He's being raised by a druid and kind of being, you know, like groomed to be a king, taught to be a king, although he doesn't really know that that's what his future holds. When he finds a baby girl on their doorstep, everyone thinks that she is from, you know, the fair folk, or I think in this series they call them the good folk, and think that they should not take her in, but Breedy believes that she is a gift from a goddess, from the moon goddess, and that it is his destiny to take care of her. And so the two of them end up growing up together, and she ends up actually being much more involved in his destiny than anybody really would have expected. For better or for worse. Yeah, so that's the first one. This is the second one. This takes place about 5 years after the events of the first book, and we're actually following different characters. So some of the characters that were like side characters in the first book are now the main focus in this one, which is something that I think happens in a lot of Juliet Marillier's books, is that she does kind of these like companion series, which is something that I really like. But yeah, so this one, we're following different characters. I'm not gonna like, I guess I can't really talk about who it is because it's the second book. I don't want to like spoil anything. But I am, actually, how far into this am I? I am 56 pages into it, so I'm not very far in. I think on Goodreads it says I'm like 10% into the book, but already loving this. I'm very excited to see where it goes. I have very little memory of this series. It has been about probably close to 15 years since I read this series the first time, and I've never reread it since reading it the first time. So honestly, I remember almost nothing about this, and it's kind of just like reading it for the first time now, and I'm just totally sucked into it. These are books that, like, if I start reading it at night, like, I will stay up way too late reading these because I just get so sucked into it. I don't know, there's somebody sounds like they're like sawing outside my window, so I don't know if you can hear that, but I just got distracted by it. Anyways, but yes, this series, it's the kind that, like, I'll stay up late reading these because I just love it. There's something about like Juliet Marlier's writing, but especially something about in this series, that it just like is so captivating to me, even though the story is like kind of quiet and slow, but I'm just so into it. Okay, anyways, I'm not being super articulate about this, but I'm really enjoying it. So now we are going on to, what am I going to read next? And both of the options for what I will read next are rereads, and are ones, well, one of them I've talked about before and just keep not getting to, and one of them is kind of an obvious one. So the obvious next read could be The Well of Shades by Juliet Marillier, which is the third book in the Breedy Chronicles. So depending on how like emotionally I'm feeling at the end of The Blade of Fortru, maybe I'll be able to dive straight into this next book, or I might have to read something in between. I'm not sure. Ideally, I would love to be able to just go straight into this so that I could squeeze the whole trilogy into 1 month and just be able to wrap it up all together. But this is a possibility. The other option, if I want to read something in between, is my reread of The Binding. I've talked about this a couple times and said that I really want to read this in January. Kind of depends on how my reading goes, but I do still want to reread this and reread it very soon. It might end up being at the beginning of February, which I don't think anybody else but me cares about. Just in my head that I'm like, this is a book that I have to read in January. But yeah, so this is also an option for my next book to read. Although honestly, this was like, I loved this book the first time I read it and was like a 5-star book that I was obsessed with. So I don't know if this counts as a very good like palate cleanser. I might have to rethink this strategy, but these are the ones that are kind of on my mind at the moment. I don't currently have a audiobook that I am listening to, but I am about to start So Many Beginnings by Bethany C. Morrow, which is the Little Women retelling or remix. I'm not sure if it's like a retelling or reimagining or what, remix. I don't know exactly how to define it, but it is inspired by Little Women. And that is another one that I particularly wanted to read in January. So I'm about to start the audiobook for that. All right, so those are all of the books that I am currently reading, that I'm going to be reading next. I would love to know how your reading at the beginning of the year is. How has your 2022 started off? I hope that it has been going well and you have been having a great beginning to your reading year. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!